Welcome back, everybody. This is Felix Marquardt hosting the collaboration between the Black Elephant Experience and Neutrality Studies. And it's my great pleasure today to welcome Dr. Zachary Foster, who is a historian of Palestine and the founder of Palestine Nexus. Zachary, welcome.
Felix, thank you so much for having me.
I'm delighted, really excited, especially in these tumultuous times. I mean, I guess that's been the case for a while now, but it seems to be getting worse, especially this is a channel that is devoted to bringing people on who are voices that are not heard so much by the French public. So this will ultimately be dubbed rather than dubbed. This will be dubbed into French. Yeah, I'm excited to have you on for a variety of reasons. We'll go through some of them. I'd love to have you start from the personal. So the first question I have for you, as I do for all guests, is tell us something about you that most people don't know.
I am an avid basketball player, so I play multiple times a week. Got a great game in Mexico, but I actually tore my Achilles heel a few weeks ago, so I'm out for 9 months. But normally I would be playing a lot of ball.
Okay, thanks for sharing that. And the other question we ask all guests is tell us about someone, a friend or a family member that you think of as you look at world events and how this person relates to them.
Well, my grandfather, he was born in Poland. He fled the Nazis in 1939, traveled across the Trans-Siberian Railway to China, lived in China for 5 years, fleeing the war, obviously. His entire family was killed by the Nazis. He spent a year in South America, bounced around a bit, eventually wound up in Detroit, Michigan. So I think his story is very much reminds me and is reflective of and helps us understand better the current moment. I mean, he was a refugee. He lived 6, 7, 8 years wandering from place to place, trying to find a safe and secure home, and eventually found that in the US. And we have 1.5 million Lebanese displaced, 3-4 million in Lebanon, in Iran displaced, another 2 million in Gaza displaced. Right, we're sort of witnessing it in so many refugee crises right now. So he's someone who comes to mind when thinking about the present moment.
Thank you for sharing that. So you can you tell us about your trajectory and what brought you from? I understand that you grew up with a certain relationship to Zionism, which evolved with time. So I'm curious, and I think our viewers are going to be very interested in how, we had Gabor Mate on recently, so this sort of foundational story is really important, especially right now. Again, sort of we're in a very specific context, as you're well aware. I can see from your Twitter feed of the law that is going to go through Parliament soon in France that would criminalize anti-Semitism. So anyway, I'll let you elaborate.
Yeah, look, I grew up in a very Jewish Zionist environment, going to Jewish schools, Zionist schools, Jewish summer camps, Zionist summer camps, Jewish youth groups, Zionist youth groups, right? Zionism and Judaism, at least the way they were presented to me growing up, were two sides of the same coin. It was, you would celebrate Israel's Independence Day for the same reason you would celebrate Passover and Hanukkah, right? These were all part of the Jewish tradition. At least that's how it was presented. At some point, I realized Zionism and Judaism were different things. After studying the history of the Zionist movement, in fact, I did a PhD in the history of Palestine. And so I dove quite deep into the history of Zionism. And I think the deeper you dive into the history of Zionism, the more anti-Zionist you become. I mean, that was certainly my experience, right? The more you learn about the Zionist movement, when you learn that every major Zionist leader, starting with Theodor Herzl in his diary in the 1890s, going on down to Arthur Rupin and Menachem Schenken, and all the major Zionist leaders throughout the Mandate period, right? Israel Zangwill, Zev Jabotinsky, Yosef Weitz, David Ben-Gurion, Moshe Sharet, Golda Meir. There's no exceptions. There are literally zero exceptions. They all supported the ethnic cleansing of the Palestinians. 100% of Zionist leaders wanted, supported, advocated for the mass depopulation of Palestine to make way for a Jewish state. And as soon as you realize that they all wanted, they all supported and advocated for ethnic cleansing, forcible expulsion, transfer, that was the word they used, well, then you realize the project was born in sin. And how can you support a movement based on the dispossession of another population?
Of course. Actually, for most people don't know this, but I'm sure you know this in far more detail than I do. Herzl, for a while before he became gung-ho on the project of colonizing Palestine, had another idea, which was to convert Jews of Germany and Austria to Catholicism, and he was sort of, turned away by the Catholic Church. Very different project.
Yeah, Theodor Herzl himself was an atheist. He had no religious convictions of any kind. He wanted to solve the Jewish problem, and the problem being that Jews face discrimination, right? So, well, one easy way to solve the problem would be to just convert to Catholicism, right? That's an easy solution. It turns out he ended up going with a different solution, but you're exactly correct. Most all of the major Zionist founders, thinkers in the early period, really even to this day, I mean, Benjamin Netanyahu, for example, these people are atheists. It's like they don't believe in God, but God promised them Israel. But they don't believe in God. They don't believe in the Torah. They don't believe in the Mishnah or the Talmud. These are not religious people. They don't value religious traditions or Jewish philosophy or Jewish principles, right? Judaism is founded on this idea that we're all created in the image of God. Zionism is founded on the idea that actually Palestinians are not in the image of God. They're not relevant. They don't have any rights in their own native homeland. They don't belong there. They're alien in their own country. So Zionism is very anti-Jewish, right? At its core, it's based on this idea that Jews have exclusive rights to the land of Israel. That's not a Jewish idea. So none of the Zionist leaders were in any sense religious. I mean, there's all these stories you could go back. I think it was Zev Jabotinsky once was going to a synagogue, and he tried to tip the usher in shul on Saturday morning, even though, of course, as you know, Jews are not supposed to touch money on Saturday, right? Because that's a violation of the Sabbath laws. But what does Zev Jabotinsky know, right? He's just trying to be a nice guy and tip the usher at the shul in a grotesque violation of Jewish law. So, Zionism is not, it doesn't have much to do with Judaism. It's a distortion of Judaism. I mean, that's why when it first came around, most of the rabbinic authorities rejected it. They said this is a heretical movement. It's not just unrelated to Judaism, it's anti-Jewish. It's telling you to violate Jewish law. It's telling you to ignore Jewish principles. It's telling you to go pack up and move to Palestine in violation of Torah law, which says actually you're supposed to wait until the Mashiach comes, and only God decides when the Mashiach comes, and that's when you can go to Palestine, but not before. And that's why to this day you have hundreds of thousands of Jews, religious Jews, Satmar Hasidim, the ultra-Orthodox Jews, right, who believe Zionism is as much a heresy as Islamic Christianity, right? That this is a totally heretical movement.
I actually on this, I discovered, and again, this is something that I need a historian to sort of walk us through properly, but that there were initially far more people from the British aristocracy who considered themselves Israelites, and as part of sort of a millenarist movement inherited from the Crusades. I mean, actually.
That's right. So in the 17th century, so in the 1640s, and then beyond, obviously, you had this movement founded in England, known as the Restorationist movement. And these people, they were inspired as a result of the Protestant Reformation that swept through Europe in the previous over the course of the previous century, in which Christians around Europe decided they were inspired by Martin Luther, and they realized that they don't need the Catholic priests to interpret the Bible for them. They could read the Bible themselves. It was a kind of return to a kind of literalism, a literal reading of the Bible. We don't need our own theology and our own text to be mediated by this priestly class. We can read the text ourselves and understand their plain meaning. And as a result, they started digging through the Bible, and they found, Genesis chapter 12, Genesis chapter 8, Deuteronomy chapter 4, all these passages talking about the return of the Israelites. Those who praise Israel, will be blessed, and those who curse Israel will be cursed. Right? All these passages, so that they're reading it and they're like, aha, the Bible says the Israelites in Deuteronomy, it says the Israelites are going to return to Palestine, and they believe this is true. So we need to revive, rebuild, reestablish, reconstitute a Jewish commonwealth in the land of Palestine. And that ideology that begins in the 1640s is pushed to the sidelines at the end of the 17th century when this millenarialist movement, when these restorationists lose power in England, and they're overthrown, and there's a kind of a minor, there's a change in power in England, so they're sidelined. So the movement kind of fades into the background, and you don't see another revival, let's say, until Napoleon in 1799, when he invades Palestine and calls for the establishment of a Jewish commonwealth, because he believes that if he calls for a Jewish commonwealth, this will herald a kind of a Jewish awakening around the world. Jews will unite in support, and again, because he's facing heavy resistance in Palestine, right? You have these local Ottoman fiefdoms, the Jazar Pasha and others, and they're quite fierce, and they resist Napoleon's attempt to invade Palestine. So in order to try to bring about a kind of a support for his invasion, including among the local Jewish population in Palestine at the time, he basically calls for the establishment of a Jewish commonwealth in Palestine. Of course, nothing materializes from that invasion, but you get this movement in England now in the 19th century, kind of a revival of that same restorationist movement beginning in the 19th century. And you have not like one or two or three, but I'm talking dozens and dozens of priests, pastors, theologians, scholars, writers, travelers, who are talking about reviving a Jewish state in Palestine in the 1830s and 40s. You even have the Prime Minister of Britain himself, Lord Palmerston, I believe is his name, along with a number of others. You have, for example, a British consul sitting in Damascus, who in 1840 publishes a memo. I think it's public. He publishes it as this kind of manifesto calling for a Jewish state in Palestine. And when I was in the Ottoman archives in Istanbul, I found this exact manifesto that was published in English. So the Ottomans are well aware of what's happening, right? They're following this movement of Europeans calling to restore Palestine from the Ottoman Empire. And so in the aftermath of the 1840, so then in 1830, the Ottoman Egyptian upstart Mahmud Ali, he sends his son to conquer Palestine in 1830. So actually, Palestine is under Egyptian rule from 1830 to 1840. They take Palestine away from the Ottomans. And then the Ottomans want it back. And so the British are like, sure, we'll help you. No problem. We'll help you get Palestine back. But you have to give us concessions. So then, in the aftermath of 1840, you get all these British, and you get French, and you get Russian, and you get German, and you get all these consular offices, and then foreigners and Germans and Americans are allowed to move to Palestine and establish residence in Palestine, which they weren't allowed to do before 1830, but now they can. So basically, you get this influx of British, American, German, French, Russian, Italian, Spanish influence in Palestine beginning the second half of the 19th century. And it's all of these missionaries and educators and pilgrims who actually believe in the Bible, right? These are Bible, like, card-carrying, Bible-believing Christians, and they all believe in this restorationist vision. Many of them are Protestants, and many of them believe that at the end of days, God will return to Palestine, and there will be a second coming of Christ. But in order for that to happen, the Jews need to congregate in Palestine, and that will help bring about this second coming of Jesus Christ. And that's this millenarianist, restorationist, now today evangelical view.
Mm-hmm. So there's as you know well, the thesis, this whole concept of the clash of civilizations was coined by someone from your alma mater, whom I read a lot when I was in college, being in the one of Edward Said. And I sort of have to say that Bernard Lewis was one of the people. So my journey is a bit different. Like I had all the cards, I had all the right mentors, and then I sold my soul for 20 years and went to the dark side and just bought into the mainstream media bullshit about this issue. And I'm only relatively recently back, like I would say, 5 years plus, something like that. But so anyway, so that's my personal journey. I'm interested in it. One of the things that's been on my mind since the beginning of this war on against Iran is the fact that, in a way, in a strange sort of perverted way, it seems that Huntington was right about the fact that there was something that was coming up. The thing where he got it completely wrong is that we are the baddies. But this whole idea of an alliance between certain forces in the Islamic world and China-ish, kind of, it seems that sort of that's what's happening. Like there's a part of me that feels like when I go on social media, which is really sort of reassuring about humanity these days, it feels like what's underway is an unraveling of like the biggest propaganda story of all time, which is sort of the massive gaslighting that is the West. And so I'm curious, how did you interact with the work of Lewis? Were you already sort of completely aware of his, like, the limits of his work, just to speak kindly? And what do you think of it? Can you tell us a bit about him and how, sort of, your take on all that?
Sure. Yeah. So first of all, I never had any personal interaction with Bernard Lewis at all. The year I started my PhD at Princeton was 2011. It was actually the very first year in decades that he did not give the inaugural lecture that is given every year in my department. At that point, I think he had relocated to Philadelphia. He was in a nursing home, right? He was very old, and he passed away a number of years ago when I think at the age of 100, right? So he was, his last 5-10 years of his life, he was not very active, right? He was quite old and not writing or speaking. Now, Bernard Lewis is a kind of a giant in the field of Middle East history, right? He did his PhD, I believe he finished it before World War II. So 1930s. He served the British Army during World War II. And then in the aftermath of the war, he was given access to the Ottoman archives in Istanbul and writes a number of very important works in the social and economic history of the Ottoman Empire, because he's one of the first Western researchers to be allowed into the Ottoman archives. And he writes some very important studies on the Tapu registry, the 16th century Ottoman demographic archives, I believe, basically trying to understand the population sizes of various parts of the empire and so on and so forth. And he does some important work on the Ottoman history. He also wrote a number of important works on Islamic history. Like I think his dissertations on the Ismailiyya sect of Islam, right? This sect of Islam that's, I think, popular in Yemen today. But it's so his background and expertise is in Islamic history, and it's in Ottoman history
as well. No, right?
And he's also, He has also written on Roman and Greek history. Like he has a classical training, right? So he reads Latin and Greek and Arabic, and he's a linguist, honestly, first and foremost, right? He's translated Persian poetry and Turkish poetry and Arabic poetry. He's a linguist, he's a historian, he's an expert on Islam. But when it comes to like modern Middle East history, he hasn't actually really written all that much. He's not an expert on the modern period. But in any case, he became this kind of doyen in the field, and he developed close relationships with many important world leaders. He became this kind of larger than life figure, right? He was friends with Israeli prime ministers. He had close contacts in the White House and in the U.S. administrations over the years. He was perceived to be paramount in the U.S.'s attack. It's the U.S. war on Iraq in 2003. He was giving lectures to senior White House officials in the weeks and months leading up to that war, explaining to them, how important it was to bring democracy to the Middle East, how this regime would topple easily, how you could remake Iraq, how blah blah. Like he was one of the key intellectual pillars that led Douglas Feith and Donald Rumsfeld and Dick Cheney and this crew of neocons. He was friends with them. He was considered one of the key intellectual, let's say, instigators behind the war.
And so how did that inform, people are these days, there's a lot of questioning going on about the role of Israel in actually pushing America into the Iraq war, not just the one that we're seeing now, but the Iraq war itself. And there's quite a bit of controversy around that question. What is your take?
I mean, we could literally play the video clips right now on this stream. I mean, you have it, Benjamin Netanyahu, who I believe at the time is sitting in the opposition. He's not prime minister. I believe this is in 2002. Prime minister is Ariel Sharon at the time. Netanyahu comes to the U.S. Congress and gives a speech before the Congress and says, democracy will reverberate throughout the Middle East after you topple Saddam Hussein, right? Like, there's no debate. I mean, it's a controversy because, Israel's apologists don't want the world to know. They don't want the world to realize that Israel played a key role in driving the U.S. to war. But of course it did. Pull up the clip. Let's watch it right now. And then you also have op-eds. You have op-eds in Israeli press. Israeli leaders are gung-ho about bringing down Saddam. I mean, he's fired Scud missiles at Israel back in the 80s, right? He was supporting Yasser Arafat, right? He was a backer of the PLO. Of course they wanted to get rid of Saddam. I mean, of course they did. There's no controversy. There's no debate. The only debate and the only controversy is a result of the apologists in Israel who don't want the world to realize that Israel has dragged the United States into every catastrophic war it's been involved in over the past 2 decades.
I think to be fair, I think it's not only those, like Norm Finkelstein, for instance, is one of the people who've spoken out recently about this and and I think obviously he can't be accused of not being a real honest critic of Israel. I think his point is that in this whole never-ending saga conversation about the dog, its tail, who's wagging, etc., he wanted to point out that at the end of the day, what we're faced with is an imperial system, and atop that system is the U.S.
No question. No question.
And so I think it's fair to sort of say that while the interests of Israel were clearly aligned with those of the neocons, that does not mean that it was that it was Israel that sort of pushed the anyway.
I think the key difference between the Iraq War of 2003 and the Iran War of 2026 is that I think the Iraq War of 2023, although yes, it was part of the Israeli agenda, it was also in many ways a key component of the U.S. agenda, leaving aside Israel. With or without Israel, you had this neocon bloc that believed the future, the 21st century would be a century in which America heralds democracy around the world, right? And we topple autocratic regimes, and right, this was actually the attitude. I mean, it's hard to believe now that people actually believe this, but this is what they believe. So yes, there's no doubt about what you're saying is correct, right? This was a U.S. imperial project driven by U.S. neocons to serve U.S. interests that aligned with Israeli interests.
Yeah.
Whereas in 2026, I think it's a very different story, right? This is an Israeli war to serve Israeli interests, to bring down an Israeli threat, to solve Israel's problems in the region. But what is the U.S. interest in tripling the cost of a barrel of oil, in bringing an end to the opening of the like closing the Strait of Hormuz, of destroying all of its allies in the Gulf, of literally bringing an end to the U.S. military presence in the Gulf? Tell me how that's in the U.S. interest. I don't know.
I mean, yeah, I think, well, that's part of my answer to that would be that that's why I'm not completely a realist in my very modest and, very Philistine understanding of IR, because I'm just a high school dropout, basically. So, but like what I would say is that the fact that this is clearly backfiring does not mean that there weren't that there wasn't a strong push in weapons manufacturing and a variety of sort of power plays in the US. For instance, I could see how this has, to some extent, at the beginning, caused a change in the energy supply. So the supply chains of energy to China in a way that you could argue, and if you look at the fact that these supply chains are being disturbed, not just in the Straits of Hormuz, but also in Russia, you begin to see.
I think my main response to we did it to challenge China is that you're sort of, I think that the false assumption here is that you're reading into Trump's playbook much more than you should be, right? That this 6D chess, like, okay, let's review the facts here. Like, Trump thought this would be a 4-day operation, right? Trump thought we were going to be in and out, 2-day operation. We're going to be in and out. We're going to topple the regime. It's going to be a Venezuela 2.0. There's going to be a Delcy Rodriguez of Iran. They're going to do exactly what we want. So you have to realize, like, everything about the planning and leading up to this war was like 100% delusional. Like, there were zero experts in the room. Like, Iran for the 6 months leading up to this war, between the June 2025 war and the February 28th, 2026 invasion attack, every Iranian leader, every Iranian pundit, every Iranian analyst who had an ear of the regime was saying the same thing. They were saying, like, Iran has changed its approach. We're done with strategic patience. That era is over. There's a new era in which any attack on Iranian territory, be it firing a single missile on Iranian territory, be it a decapitation of the regime attempt, we don't care. We will go all out. We will consider this a war of annihilation against us, and we will act accordingly. And that's exactly what they've done. So, like, you're trying to blow what we need to choke China of oil, because, like, you have to realize they weren't even listening to what the obvious Iranian reaction would be to the war. So, like, to assume the U.S. government is reading in the second order and third order implications of a regime change, I just find to be totally implausible.
No, so I don't want to spend much more time on this. Fair enough, but I would say it's two different things. So I don't think that Trump is capable of 1-dimension or 2-dimension chess. So forget about 6-dimension chess. But I do think that there are people in various strategic places, centers of power in America, who thought blocking the Strait of Hormuz, making sure that we, the #1 producer since the beginning of the Ukraine war of liquid natural gas, ensuring that, I mean, we basically don't care about Americans at the gas station.
Right.
You know, let's just wreck a bit of anyway. So so what I am not absolutely saying, I'm absolutely not saying that this is, you know, some sort of very complex plot by Trump. But I do think that there are interests in America for whom this is working out splendidly. That said, as I said, I don't want to spend more time on this.
Absolutely.
But I am very interested in one of the things that I find fascinating about the conversation on Israel is how it has moved. You know, it's become sort of this generational divide in the US among the Jewish community. There's really you know, like I think it's now there's only 37% of American Jews identify as Zionists. This was not the case not that long ago. And so there's been a real change in the conversation within Judaism in America. Now, this has not happened within Judaism in Europe.
That's right.
And second, there is this weird, very sort of quite scary alliance between European Judaism and the governments of France, Britain, and Germany, to mention only those three, that is trying to convince people in those countries that this change, that this divorce, this generational schism that has occurred in America has not happened. They're trying to silence, they're trying to pretend that this hasn't happened. Yeah. And the result is that you still have a lot of people, I think, who just don't know better, who are misinformed and clueless, who really believe that things like the Loi Yadon, this very bizarre piece of legislation, which, by the way, is carried by a woman whose election should have been annulled because her campaign accounts have been nullified. Like they're not anyway. So it's a very strange situation, and like what's your take on this, and B, what do you have to say to European Jewry about like the absurdity of their position and their this continued unconditional support for Israel, and this farce that basically the problem is not Israel, the problem is Netanyahu?
Yeah, there's a lot there. So let's start with maybe the difference between U.S. Jewry and then European Jewry. And I would add to that, by the way, Latin American Jewry and Middle Eastern, some other Jewish communities around the world, where you have Israel and the United States are kind of the polar ends. So Israel, the Jews in Israel, the most fascist, the most dogmatic, the most religious, the most messianic, right? The most genocidal. And then Jews in the United States are at the opposite end. They're the most progressive, the most likely to be anti-Zionist, the most likely to be socialist, the most like, et cetera, et cetera. And European Jewry is somewhere in the middle. They're not quite as genocidal and fascistic as the Israeli Jews are, but they're not that far from them. I mean, just to give one example, the deputy of the board of British Jews is the most important British Jewish organization today. They have 160 some odd members. About a year and a half ago, the two members of the board. So there's these are like the Jewish communal leaders of the UK, right? And two members of the board publish an op-ed critical of Israel, critical of Israel's actions in Gaza. Okay, not calling for an end to Zionism, not calling for an end to the war in Gaza, criticizing the war in Gaza, not calling it a genocide, criticizing Israel's actions in Gaza, they were kicked out of the board, okay, by the board's president, Philip Rosenberg, who was pictured about a year ago taking a selfie with Israel Katz, or was it Isaac Herzog? No, I'm forgetting which one. But an Israeli leader who has regurgitated all the genocide. Oh no, it was Gideon Sa'ar, who was Israeli foreign minister at the time, who has spewed just the most genocidal rhetoric, just like every other Israeli leader. So that's British Jews. Now you have the Jews in France and Germany. Now, you just pointed out this this new bill. I guess I don't know what the current status of it in France is, but
it almost it was almost brought forward for a vote, and that was postponed. Yeah, but there's a petition going around right now to try to get this annulled.
Yeah, French Jews are, I think, similar to British Jews, much closer to Israel in terms of their allegiances to Zionism and their genocidal views towards the Palestinians. You have tens and tens of thousands of French Jews who have moved to Israel over the past many, many years. They're kind of the largest wave of recent immigrants. There's a large Muslim population in France, larger than most other European countries. So there is that antagonism. There have been attacks on the French Jewish community, many of them. So they're kind of entrenched in their ways, and so you get this kind of legislation, right, which is for trying to adopt the IHRA definition of anti-Semitism as the sort of official definition of anti-Semitism. And if you violate that definition, you're anti-Semitic and you'll face legal consequences. Now, the problem with this definition is it calls likening Israeli policies to the Nazis. It defines that as anti-Semitism. Now, as you well know, David Ben-Gurion, the kind of the George Washington of Israel, right? He's the hero. He's the he's first prime minister. He declared Israel's establishment in 1948, right? He is like the #1 Zionist hero in human history. So he would obviously be considered an anti-Semite according to the IHR definition of anti-Semitism, because one of his favorite retorts was to call Menachem Begin, his political rival, the founder of the revisionist branch of Zionism, or not the founder, but the leader of the revisionist branch of Zionism in the 1950s and 60s. He loved to call him a Nazi, like all the time. Like he would call him a Nazi left and right. So like the most important Zionist in history, he's obviously an anti-Semite. By the way, Albert Einstein, Hannah Arendt, and many of the most important Jewish leaders in the 1940s and 50s, these people would also describe the Cherut Party, which was Menachem Begin's party and Zev Jabotinsky's party. They would also describe that party as a Nazi party. Guess why? Because it was inspired by the fucking Nazis. That's why. It was actually inspired by the Italian fascists and the Nazi SS movement. They inspired, so of course they're going to compare it to the Nazis because it's a fucking Nazi-inspired party. So, but they're of course anti-Semites. Now, there's another interesting piece to the IHR definition of anti-Semitism, which is likening Israel to describing Israel as a racist state is also anti-Semitic. Okay, so let me get this straight. You have two people, right? Now they both live in Hebron. One is Jewish, one is Palestinian. They're actually neighbors. They literally share a wall. Like the Jewish wall, like this guy's wall is like the Palestinians' wall. It's literally the same wall. Okay. Now, if a Jew gets arrested in Hebron, the police are required to charge him with something within 48 hours, or they have to release him. Now, if a Palestinian gets arrested in Hebron, right? They live, they're neighbors. Remember, the Palestinian has 178 hours before the Israeli government has to bring forward any charges or decide what to do with them. So like that's what we call racism, where one group of person, depending on their ethnic identity, their religious identity, has one set of laws. The other person has a separate set of laws. So like, but if you say that, you're anti-Semitic according to the IHA definition of anti-Semitism. Or if you say like In 1948, when Israel was established, right, it expelled 750,000 Palestinians from their homes and didn't allow them to return after the war. But it did allow hundreds of thousands of Jewish refugees to return. So let me get this straight. So like this is like the core, this is like the founding principle of the state of Israel, right? It's that like if you're a Jewish refugee in 1949, you can come to Israel. But if you were born in Palestine, you were raised in Palestine, and you were expelled from Palestine in 48, and you want to return to Palestine in 1949, you can't return because you have the wrong blood type. That is what we call racism. So at the core of the idea of Israel is this idea that one group, one religious ethnic group, that is the Jews, should have more rights, should have more privileges, should have more benefits than all other groups. So at the core of the idea of the state of Israel is a racist ideology. But if you say that, you're anti-Semitic. So the IHR definition is not about trying to prevent anti-Semitism. It's about trying to prevent criticism of Israel. And that's it. That's all it is. It's just to silence criticism of Israel.
Yeah, what's fascinating to me about it is that there's something so anti-Semitic about it.
Correct.
It's very bizarre.
The definition of anti-Semitism is itself anti-Semitic, because what it is doing, it is saying Avraham Berg, former Israeli Knesset chairperson, Albert Einstein, David Ben-Gurion. By the way, like many other Israeli leaders, I'm just naming a few of the big ones, but like you would literally, according to this definition of anti-Semitism, you basically have to call every Jew in the world anti-Semitic, because every Jew in the world at some point or another has compared this, that, or another Israeli leader to a Nazi. So it's like all Jews are anti-Semites. I'm not sure how, if that's the definition you want to go with, I'm like, it sounds like that's probably not a very good definition of anti-Semitism if it labels like the vast majority of Israeli leaders anti-Semites.
Yeah. What would you have to, I mean, I think would people in like really would people in France, given the state, I mean, it sounds absurd, to be honest, when I speak to people outside France about this, but
like Felix, can I just give you one more quick example? Like,
yeah,
just
please.
Highlight the absurd, like, let's just say, for example, tomorrow, Israel passed a law called the Nuremberg Law. And then let's just say, for example, Israel started putting Palestinians in gas chambers. Again, totally hypothetical. I'm not saying Israel would ever do that. I'm not putting it past them. They haven't done that. But let's just say they did, theoretically. Would it be anti-Semitic to compare Israel to the Nazis in a world in which Israel is putting Palestinians in gas chambers? So it requires you to believe that Israel can never do something akin to the Nazis. Like, it requires you to believe in like the state of the world like can only exist in one state and it can never exist in another state. Like, it requires you to believe in like it's just not a serious definition. Like, zero serious people would believe that a definition of an ideology like could never include that state doing something. Like, it's just totally nonsensical. Like, Israel can't do something akin to the Nazis. Like, it can't. That's the nature of this definition of anti-Semitism.
No, it's a whole level. It's a whole new level of absurdity. I'm as you are also very much aware. Just a few days ago, Rima Hassan, the member of European Parliament, was summoned for the 4th time by the French police,
right?
For apologia of terrorism, for a tweet, and no less. And meanwhile, you have the son of the former president, Louis Sarkozy, who recently called for the Algerian embassy in Paris to be burnt down. Nothing happened. I mean, it's epic. There was a march recently against anti-Semitism, separating anti-Semitism, of course, from any other form of racism.
Right.
And every member of the government marched.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
I mean,
and just none of these people marched for any other anti-racist march. I mean, it's like, just.
I think this is another one of the peculiar aspects of the anti-Semitism industry is that like existing laws covering discriminatory actions and hate speech. And by the way, there's like a Norman Finkelstein argument that you don't even need hate speech laws, right? Because like if I kill you, does it matter really? Like if I killed you because you were black, or if I killed you because I don't like the smile on your face, like does it really matter? I don't know. I mean, you could debate that, is all I'm saying. So, but let's just say you do believe in the importance of having a hate speech law, or, you know, a specific laws that, because you believe that these things have, they can escalate, and that you're sort of trying to kind of build a fence around the law. And so this helps. Okay, fine. Now, do you need a special definition? You're telling me no one had any idea what anti-Semitism meant before the IHR definition solved that problem for us? Like, do people not know what like anti-Muslim is? Like, is there no way of understanding what like anti-Black racism is, or anti-Muslim racism, anti-Jewish racism? Like we really need like 18 examples of what anti-Jewish behavior is to understand what discrimination against Jews looks like? I mean, it's a completely ridiculous premise. But so basically, you have this entire anti-Semitism industry, and you know we're going to help everyone understand what well, we need experts to offer training sessions. What is and is not anti-Semitism? If you use the word Zionist in this context, well, that's anti-Semitic. But if you use it in a slightly different context, it's actually not anti-Semitic. So you're telling me we need platforms making these decisions? If I say I'm a proud Zionist, well, I can be on TikTok. Yeah, I can say how much I love Zionism, TikTok. But if I'm critical of Zionism and I use Zionist almost as a kind of a pejorative word, but so then I'm anti-Semitic. Help me understand that one. Like, if I don't like an ideology, I'm racist. If I do like the ideology, then I'm awesome. Like, just help me understand that. Like, that doesn't make any sense. Like, it's not a coherent perspective. It's not a coherent worldview. In order, like the people championing anti-Semitism today are not coherent people. They don't have a coherent understanding of the world, right? Because they require you to believe that like you need a special anti-Semitism czar in the White House to solve the rampant problem of Jews being denied entry at universities, and Jews being denied access to law firms, and Jews being pushed out of the banking sector and the finance world. No Jews in finance. I don't know if you knew that, Felix. There are also no Jews in academia because of all the discrimination Jews face trying to get jobs at institutions of higher learning. By the way, there's also no Jews in the tech world. No Jews in tech. No Jews in big business, big finance, big pharma. Jews have been left out, and then we need an anti-Semitism czar to solve the rampant anti-Semitism in America.
What do you have to say to French Jews and to the people? Actually, you know, I think this is, you know, this goes beyond. There's sort of this strange sacred alliance going on between the French state and, you know, people who are honestly scared. Because I think, you know, like there's some places where I think anti-Semitism is really overblown. Like I think America is one of those places. I mean, it's definitely, I have no doubt that every time the country with a Star of David on its flag kills a bunch of people, invades a country, etc., that does not, you know, that this has an impact on anti-Semitism, you know, no question about that. But compared with the US, I would say, you know, France has a much more established history of anti-Semitism, and there is, you know, there's something that's live and well. So there is anti-Semitism in France. What do you have to say to the people who don't understand that there needs to be this separation?
Yeah, well, first of all, obviously, I'm horrified by all attacks on Jews for being Jews, on Muslims for being Muslims, on Palestinians for being Palestinians. Anyone who's targeted for who they are, anyone who is targeting someone for who they are, is carrying out a heinous act and a heinous crime. And like just a few weeks ago, there was an attack on the Jewish on a synagogue in West Bloomfield, Michigan, where I come from, my hometown. Temple Israel was attacked by a Lebanese man whose family was slaughtered by the Israeli military shortly before that. So, of course, it's grotesque to go carry out violence against Jewish school children in West Bloomfield, or Jewish adults, Jewish elderly people who of whatever age. It's grotesque to carry out violence against random Jews in some random place because you disagree with Israel. Obviously, I'm the first one to speak out against that. Now, the problem, of course, is that if you're a Jewish institution and you wave an Israeli flag and you sing the prayer for the state of Israel in synagogue on Saturday morning, and then you sing a prayer wishing safety on the soldiers of the state of Israel in synagogue on Saturday morning, and then on your website it says donate to the IDF, and then you go to synagogue on Saturday morning and they're handing out flyers that say donate to the Israeli Defense Forces, and then you send your kids to school and they learn to sing the Israeli national anthem at the synagogue. And then in synagogue on Saturday morning, the rabbi gets up and gives a sermon telling everyone in the congregation that they need to support Israel. And then they need to send their kids to Israel, and they need to donate to the IDF to help murder 100,000 Palestinians in Gaza. So when you do those things, what you're actually doing is you're endangering members of your community because you're inviting evil into your community. When the chief rabbi of the United Kingdom says, Zionism leaps off of every page of the Jewish prayer book, the Siddur, what you're doing is you're inviting someone to write Free Palestine in the Siddur. And so let me ask you this, Felix. If I'm the rabbi of a shul and I say, Zionism leaps off every page of the Siddur, and then a Palestinian or a Christian or someone who's against genocide comes into the synagogue and writes Free Palestine on every page of the Siddur, are they anti-Semitic? I don't know. You just said this isn't a religious book. You just told me this is a political book. You just told me this prayer book written 1,000 years ago is a political manifesto. So I'm not anti-Semitic if I write Free Palestine. There's a political space. You turned your synagogue into a political space. So I have a right to political protest in front of your political space. Yeah. So again, it's a very, so when Jews, of course, I'm not inviting violence, but I am saying if you want to turn your synagogue into a political space, well, then I have a right to protest your synagogue because you made it political, not me. So, but I mean, I'm not encouraging, of course, I would never advocate for violence. I'm saying that a nonviolent protest in front of a synagogue or in front of a Jewish community center or some kind of Jewish object, Jewish civilian object, which has embraced genocide and apartheid is legitimate, in my view.
Can you tell us a bit more about Palestine Nexus? And we spoke earlier on about sort of classes and sort of the lack of education on Palestine. Yeah, tell us about what you founded and how it's going.
So a few years ago, I founded Palestine Nexus. It's a media and educational brand. We teach courses on the history of Palestine, the history of the Palestinians, the history of Zionism, the history of Jewish anti-Zionism. We also publish articles on history of Palestine. I'm always trying to provide historical context for the present moment. As a historian, I'm interested in history. History is very relevant to what's happening today. For example, last week I published a piece on a brief history of Israel's attempts to dominate Lebanon, right? So Israel's invading Lebanon. They've declared their intent to occupy Lebanon south of the Litani River. That has a long history. And so I'm trying to tell that history, to help people understand how we got to where we got to today. We also publish articles by writers in Gaza and elsewhere in Palestine. So it's become a kind of an educational resource. We also have maps. It's an archive. It's a digital archive. I've added, probably uploaded about 40,000 documents from various historical periods relating to Palestine and the Middle East. And you can find all of that at PalestineNexus.com.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. And is there a way for people who don't speak English to access some of that in French?
Right. Well, so the documents and the maps, you're just downloading, some of that might actually even be in French. Some of the documents, there might be some French documents. In terms of the articles, well, like with machine translation, as good as it is these days, I would just encourage everyone to just machine translate any of the articles. Is like one button, you can install a plugin and it just translates everything on the page. You don't even need to copy and paste anything. And then as far as the courses go, look, YouTube has basically, if you upgrade if you buy a course, it's the sessions are all uploaded to YouTube, and you can auto translate live. So yeah, you basically could access everything in French if you wanted to. With the state of machine translation as these days, I think you'd benefit just as much almost.
It's probably going to improve very fast as well.
Yeah.
Zachary, thank you so much for being with us.
Felix, my pleasure. Thanks for having me.
All right. Let me turn this off. All right.